The boy hadn't spoken in days, not since the fire, but when he saw the dog, scarred, limping, yet standing tall at the hospital gates, his lips moved, just one word. Home. Nobody knew why that word, or why that dog, but that moment sparked something no doctor had been able to reach. Welcome to Save by Tales. Before we begin this powerful story of survival and unexpected bonds, tell me in the comments, have you ever had an animal pull you out of a dark time? Or do you know someone who has? If you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, like, share, and subscribe for more tales of resilience, healing, and the quiet power of four-legged heroes. The corridors smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. Nurses walked with a practiced urgency, shoes squeaking against sterile tiles. Room 207 was just another door in a hallway full of them, except for the sign taped carefully beside it. No loud noises. No questions about the fire. Inside, Elliot sat still, 8 years old, pale, lips chapped. His hands were bandaged, one of them trembling slightly from the nerve damage. His eyes stared forward at the window, where sunlight crept in like it didn't know whether it was allowed. He hadn't spoken in 6 days. Not to the doctors, not to the therapists, not to his mother. Caroline sat beside his bed now, fingers twisted in her lap. Her face was blotchy from crying, but the tears were dry today. She wasn't sure if that was progress or just exhaustion. The fire had taken everything. The apartment, the drawings on the fridge, the cat, the guitar, the smell of cinnamon pancakes from Saturday mornings, and Elliot's voice. He's in shock, they told her. Give it time. But time had already robbed her of too much. She reached over and touched the back of his hand gently. I'm here, baby, she whispered. I'm not going anywhere. He didn't blink. Across the city, behind the iron gate of a forgotten shelter, a dog stood motionless in the early morning chill. He was large, German Shepherd mix perhaps, though leaner, with a matted coat and eyes that looked too old for the rest of him. His back left leg had a slight hitch when he moved. A jagged scar split the fur above one eye. No one came to adopt him. He didn't bark like the others, didn't whimper or try to win sympathy. Instead, he watched the shelter door, every morning, every afternoon, as if he were waiting for something that had already passed him by. The staff had given up calling him by the numbers on his collar. They called him Ashes. Back in room 207, the child psychiatrist tapped her pen on her notepad. He's not unresponsive, she told Caroline gently. He's aware, but trauma does strange things. Sometimes silence is the safest place. Caroline nodded, though she wasn't sure what to do with that. He went home that night and sat on the edge of her mattress, surrounded by unopened boxes and half-melted memories. Her phone buzzed, a co-worker from her old veterinary clinic. I know it's a weird time, but there's this dog. Something about him. He's been waiting for someone. Would Elliot be up for a visit? The next morning, Caroline hesitated outside, room 207 with trembling hands. Beside her, a leash trembled too, but from tension, not fear. Ashes didn't pull, didn't whine. But when the nurse opened the door and he stepped inside, everything stilled. Elliot turned his head, for the first time in days, and met the dog's gaze. It wasn't excitement, it wasn't joy, it was recognition. Ashes walked forward, slow and steady, and sat beside the bed. Elliot moved his hand, almost imperceptibly, letting his fingers rest near Ashes's paw. A moment passed. 2. Then Elliot spoke. Home. Caroline gasped, covering her mouth. Tears fell, unchecked. And Ashes, he didn't move. He didn't wag. He just sat there, like he'd been waiting for this boy all along. Ashes didn't leave. Not that day. Not the next. Not the one after that. The hospital allowed it. A special exception. Once the story of Elliot's first spoken word got around, nurses lobbied the administration. Therapists called it a breakthrough. Caroline called it a miracle. But Elliot never spoke again after that first home. Not yet. Ashes settled in beside the bed each morning, his scarred body curled gently at Elliot's side like a sentinel who had finally found his post. When nurses came in, Elliot's eyes followed them, but only if Ashes stayed close. When therapists asked questions, he remained quiet, except for one change, his drawings. They started appearing on the backs of meal menus and tissue boxes, crude outlines at first, circles, flames, a child's form with 2 long arms. A black figure always hovered nearby, not looming, just present. Then slowly, the drawings sharpened. A boy by a window, a shadowed dog beneath it, fire behind them both. One drawing caught Caroline's breath in her throat. He showed Elliot's tiny figure, holding the leash of a large, scarred dog. The background, rubble, a building collapsed in on itself. The sky, black. And Elliot had drawn the word after in block letters above it. One afternoon, Caroline brought Ashes to the hospital early. She'd taken a leave from work, but she still remembered how to hold a leash, how to speak in soft tones. As they waited in the hallway, a man in scrubs approached, tall, dark eyes, sleeves rolled above the elbows. "Hi," he said. "I'm Dr. Matteo. I specialize in animal-assisted trauma therapy. I've been following Elliot's case." She looked at him sideways. "You think this is therapy?" "I think," he said carefully, "his dog may know something none of us do, not consciously, but instinctively. Some dogs recognize pain like a scent." Ashes looked up at that moment, as if summoned by the word, then turned back toward the door, waiting for it to open. That night, Caroline dreamed of fire, not of the apartment, or of Elliot's screams, but of silence, of Ashes walking through flames like a ghost, not burning, not running, just watching. And then she woke up with a single phrase echoing in her head. Where did he come from? The next day, Caroline visited the shelter again. The clerk at the desk smiled sadly when she asked about Ashes. "He was dumped outside our gates at night. No note, no chip. He never barks, never fights. He just watches." "Has he ever reacted to other people, children?" The woman shook her head, only to leave the gate and walk to the far end of the fence every day around 6 a.m., like he's meeting someone who never shows up. Back at the hospital, Dr. Matteo laid out a plan. "Elliot isn't ready to speak, but he's drawing. That's a start. Let's try narrative therapy, storytelling through images." They gave Elliot a sketch pad. He ignored it at first, then he began again, one frame at a time, a sequence, a child waking in smoke, a window cracked open, a dog barking outside. And the last image, the child curled in fur. Ashes, always Ashes. Dr. Matteo studied the sequence quietly. "Do you see?" he told Caroline. "This isn't metaphor. I think Ashes was there that night." Elliot Caroline stared at him. "But how?" "That building was locked. The fire started in the hallway. No one could have gotten in or out." They turned to Elliot, hoping for answers. He didn't speak, but his next drawing said everything. He drew a girl. The image was faint, just charcoal lines, long hair, wide eyes, a scar along the jaw. She stood beside Ashes. Her hand rested on his head. His was drawn in color. Everything sales gray. Elliot wrote one word beneath her. Elliot. Caroline clutched the sketch pad, as if it were a sacred text. "Who's Lena?" she whispered, half to herself, half to Elliot, who remained silent, his small fingers gripping Ash's fur. The name hadn't been mentioned in weeks. Not by police, not in therapy, not in the sparse reports from social workers. It hadn't come from Caroline. It hadn't come from memory exercises. It had come from Elliot, and from Ashes. Dr. Matteo studied the image again. If this girl was present the night of the fire, why wasn't she found? Caroline bit her lip. Maybe she wasn't. Maybe she's someone Elliot remembers from before. But the scar, Matteo said, pointing to the line Elliot had carefully drawn on Lena's face. That's too specific for invention. Caroline looked over at Elliot, who now sat in quiet stillness as Ashes breathed against him. "What are you trying to tell us?" she asked gently. "Is Lena real?" Elliot didn't answer, but the next time the sketchpad came back, Lena was there again, this time standing in front of a fence, holding a tattered backpack, and Ashes stood beside her, looking away. The social worker's voice was clipped. "We've cross-referenced all missing persons cases from the last 6 months. No child matching that description. No one named Lena reported missing." "He'll be fantasy," Matteo said quietly. "A forgotten child." The next breakthrough came unexpectedly. It was late afternoon. Caroline had stepped out to take a call, and Matteo sat beside Elliot, who was unusually focused on a new drawing. It showed Lena, older this time, staring through a cracked window, her hand pressed against the glass. Ashes stood on the other side, and in the corner of the drawing, A figure, adult, male, angry. Who is that? Mateo asked softly. Elliot's hand trembled. He pointed at the man in the sketch, then shook his head hard. He wrote one word. Bad. He fanned. That evening, Caroline gathered all the drawings and laid them on the floor in her apartment. One by one, the story emerged, not in words but in charcoal lines and bursts of color. Elliot hiding under a bed. He fanned. Lena, passing him a flashlight. Ashes dragging something heavy across a hallway. Fire. Silence. Escape. It was a story. Their story. But not from her memories. From his. The next morning, Caroline met Dr. Mateo at the hospital. Elliot sat between them, flipping slowly through a book of dogs. Police dogs. Killia 9 units. Therapy companions. Ashes beside him. Didn't move. But his ears twitched when Mateo pointed to a page. A black and grey German Shepherd. Amber eyes. Badge number on collar. The caption read, Killia 9 Baxter. Retired. Deployed 2009. 2016. Ashes stood up, placed his paw on the page. He fanned. Mateo and Caroline exchanged a glance. Oh my God, she whispered. The records confirmed it. Killia 9, Baxter, honorably discharged after an explosion during a warehouse raid. The same jagged scar down his ribs. Same collar model. He had been listed as adopted privately by a family in the outskirts of the city. And then nothing. No follow-up. No microchip renewal. No further veterinary records. Just vanished. Mateo made calls. Killian visited shelters. A name surfaced. Marcus Venn, the man who'd adopted Baxter. A reclusive veteran with no close relatives. He lived on the edges of a quiet town, far from the city. We should go, Caroline said. Mateo nodded. But not alone. They contacted the authorities. The house was small, shutters drawn, the yard overgrown. Elliot had drawn it, weeks ago, in one of his sketches, long before anyone knew where to find it. A sheriff accompanied them. The door creaked open, after the third knock. A girl peeked out, pale, eyes wary, hair tangled. The scar on her jaw was unmistakable. Lena, Killian asked. The girl blinked. Ashes stepped forward. She gasped, dropped to her knees, and wrapped her arms around his neck. You came back, she whispered. Elliot stepped from the car, eyes wide. The two children stared at each other, two fragments of a memory trying to find their way home. Lena, he fanned, Elliot said quietly, his second word in weeks. She smiled, eyes glassy. He fanned. Elliot, inside the house, things were darker. Literally, curtains nailed shut, old locks on bedroom doors, a sense of decay, not of time, but of something else, something hidden. Authorities took Lena into care immediately. Marcus Venn was nowhere to be found. Ashes never barked, but he stood in the hallway, stiff and alert, nose to the floorboards. Something was buried. When the floor was pried open later that week, detectives found what Ashes already knew. Beneath the floorboards, Lena's original birth certificate, Elliot's burned backpack, and dozens of photographs. Some of Lena alone, some of both children, and one of Marcus Venn, standing with Ashes, his hand resting firmly on the dog's head. Caroline sat on the edge of Elliot's hospital bed that evening. Lena slept in a nearby cot. The two children were finally safe. And Ashes, he lay between them, tail wagging gently in sleep, a sentinel still at his post. Where did he come from? She whispered. Only Mateo, now beside her, smiled faintly. Does it matter? He fanned. It had been 3 days since Lena was rescued from the shadow of the old house, and still no one could find Marcus Venn. Elliot and Lena were now under temporary guardianship at the children's unit of the hospital. Caroline checked on them every morning, every evening, but sleep still hadn't returned to her fully, not after what she saw beneath the floorboards, not after the weight of what had nearly gone unnoticed, into Ashes. Ashes had changed. Where once he had curled beside Elliot, like a tired guardian, now he stood more often than he lay, pacing by the door or sniffing the air as though waiting for something, for someone. Detective Sarah Holt leaned back in her chair, tapping the table with the end of a pen. Venn was discharged from the army under mental health concerns, PTSD, refused therapy, lived in isolation with the dog.
Neighbors said they rarely saw the kids. The kids? Caroline asked. You mean Elliot and Lena? Fanned. No, that's just it, Holt said, sliding a file across the desk. There's no record of Elliot ever living there. No adoption, no enrollment, no guardianship. Lena either, until she was 5. Caroline frowned. Then how? We think he took them. That night, Elliot had a nightmare. It was the first time he'd screamed since arriving at the hospital. Caroline ran in, heart racing, to find Ashes already on the bed, head pressed to the boy's chest, his body curled around Elliot like a shield. Elliot's eyes opened wide. He's coming, he whispered. Ked Lena. Then he slipped back into unconsciousness. Mateo's voice was low, as he reviewed Elliot's scan again. There's trauma here, deep suppressed, but the memories are bleeding through faster now. The dog is his anchor, his translator. And I think, he looked up, hesitating. I think Ashes knew what was going on, all along. You think he remembered? Caroline asked. Mateo nodded. Dogs remember scent, routine, pain, and trust. Elliot wasn't the only one suffering in that house. The next day, they gave Lena a set of colored pencils and a new sketch pad. She drew quietly, 4 hours, pages and pages. At first just trees, stars, a window, then a barn, then the inside of a metal container, a shipping crate, and then Ashes, barking at something we couldn't see. What is this? Caroline asked gently. The little girl turned the page. On it was a face. A man, gaunt, pale, hollow eyes. The word she wrote beneath it was not Marcus. It was Daddy. They didn't wait. Caroline and Mateo brought the drawings to Detective Holt. Within 24 hours, a search party was formed. Lena's memory of the barn led them to the outskirts of a forest where the abandoned remains of a shipping yard stood. There, behind a collapsed fence and rows of decaying containers, they found it. Ashes bolted the moment they arrived, sprinting into the maze of steel and shadow. Let him go, Mateo shouted. He'll lead us. And he did. Ashes barked wildly, pawing at a dented metal container with a rusted lock. Officers pried it open. The smell hit them first, stale, chemical, metallic. Then came the sight. A mattress, a lantern, old food cans, chains, and drawings. Hundreds of them, plastered on every wall, all drawn in charcoal. All of Elliot, all of Marcus Venn wasn't there. But what they found instead chilled them. A journal, torn pages filled with desperate, unhinged writing. They don't remember who they are. I made them forget. The girl talks in sleep. The boy watches too much. The dog knows. I can't let them live. Not until it's done. Not until they're clean. Ashes betrayed me. He bit me. Caroline read it once, then set it down. Ashes stood beside her, tail low, ears back. You protected them, she whispered, even when no one else could. 3 days later, Marcus was found. He had returned to the burned house, digging through the ashes like a man searching for bones. Police detained him quietly. No struggle, just wide, distant eyes and shaking hands. He never asked for a lawyer. He only asked, did they remember me? Elliot did, but not with fear, with understanding. When he saw Marcus's image on the news, he didn't flinch. He reached for Lena's hand. She used to cry at night, he said slowly. He said we were chosen, but we were just lost. Lena didn't speak for a while after that. But when she did, she asked a single question. Where will Ashes go? Caroline sat with Mateo at the cafe near the hospital. The question lingered like steam above their untouched. He's aging, Mateo said, but healthy, loyal. He was never just a dog. Caroline nodded. He's family. They both knew what needed to happen. That weekend, Caroline filed the paperwork to adopt both children. There would be court hearings, interviews, evaluations, but there was no question. Elliot and Lena belonged together, and Ashes belonged with them. 2 months passed. The hospital visits slowed. The nightmares faded. Caroline's small house on the edge of the park became their home. Elliot's laughter returned in small doses. Lena started humming while she drew. Ashes, always at their heels, napped more often in the sun. He had done his job, but something still lingered. One evening, as the first snowfall touched the grass outside, Elliot climbed into bed beside Ashes and whispered, "You knew where we were. You came back, even after all that time." The dog blinked slowly. Elliot nodded. "I remember now. You were hurt too." Lena crawled in beside them. Her hand traced the scar on Ash's side. We found each other, she said softly. That's what matters. Outside, the wind stirred. Inside, a single charcoal drawing hung above the fireplace. It showed a girl, a boy, and a dog, together, safe, home.